Okay, good morning, everyone. I see that we're close to 100 participants, so I suggest we start this event. I want to say a big thank you to everyone joining this morning for this event on training the trainers, data management and fair data principles in university curricula. My name is Brecht Sanen. I'm a research and innovation policy analyst at the European University Association. I'm also a work package leader in the FAIRsFAIR project. And it's sort of my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, where we'll, in a general sense, be discussing the needs and challenges of teachers and trainers of research data management and fair data principles. Will obviously, from the project where this event is a part of, come with some of the work we've been doing, some recommendations, good practices. But particularly, I think in this event, it's an opportunity also for us to share views and experiences and hear from your personal views and experiences in terms of this topic. Now, I want to get out of the way as quickly as possible and give the floor to our speakers, but we thought it was a good idea just to get everyone on the same page, to give a quick background as to the context, the project context of this specific event. This event is part of a Horizon 2020 project, fostering fair data practices in Europe. We started in March 2019. For those of you familiar with this project, that means that we are close to the end. We'll be ending February next year. And that makes that this event is coming at a very nice time. It's coming at a time where most of the work, most of the background work's already been done. And we're now in the last straight line towards our major outcomes. That means, for example, what you can see here on the screen, one of the main outputs, the competence framework, is something that my colleague Yuri Demchenko can talk to you about today to sort of get us going in terms of sharing experiences and lessons learned. Within this project, which is an enormous project, we specifically do work package 7, which is focused on fair data science curricula and professionalization. Essentially, we focus on bringing fair data practices to university curricula at the bachelor level, at the master level, and at the doctoral level. We very explicitly want to target this at an early stage and take it all the way through to the doctoral level. That's the focus of our work package. Again, I think it starts to become obvious why this event is part of this work package. The work package objectives, I'm just going to put them on screen here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but essentially it's what I said previously, is at this point we've done a lot of work in the background. We've had a couple of publications already in terms of analyzing the landscape that is out there, delivering a fair data competence framework that you'll hear more about. And we're now going in the direction of supporting with practical tools the embedding of fair data education in university programs, bachelor, master, and doctoral training. These are the work package objectives. I'm pleased to say we have achieved quite a few of them already, and now we're going towards the final end goal of this work package. The way that looks when you present it visually is that essentially we're now preparing for December of this year, the 2 practical tools, which I think are like the most relevant outcomes of this work package in terms of their practical usage by universities, people employed by universities. That means that we are now going to deliver in December an adoption handbook, fair competence adoption handbook for universities, and also a good practices report, and these 2 will complement each other. The adoption handbook will give inspiration for fair data practices in university curricula, teaching, and the good practices report will be even more practical, giving specific experiences and initiatives being taken by universities right now. The importance of what has come before that, as you can see here, the survey, the briefing, and the competence framework, again, what we'll be talking about today is that these mean that work that we've already delivered and that is available online means that both the adoption handbook and the good practices report don't come out of the clear blue sky. These are rooted in the work we've been doing since March 2019. We believe we have a very good sense of the reality on the ground right now, and that's why we feel comfortable now moving towards delivering these more practical tools to help universities further integrate FAIR data in the curricula at, again, bachelor, master, and doctoral level. That's it for my welcome. And I'm just going to quickly go through today's agenda. We've just had my welcome, and then I'm going to start announcing first our speakers. But also, just to be clear, we have, after our speakers, we have breakout rooms where the floor is for you, the participants, to come in, reflect on what you've just heard, add your own experiences where your experiences differ or where they align with what we've presented. I'll come back before the breakout rooms to announce how those breakout rooms are going to work in a practical sense. But first, it's my pleasure to announce some of the presenters. First up, we have a duo of presentations from the FAIRsFAIR project. We have Yuri Demchenko from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands and Hugh Shanahan from the University of London in the United Kingdom. They will be talking about the FAIR competence framework for higher education, as announced, and the data stewardship body of knowledge, which is also extremely relevant. And then Hugh, secondly, will be talking, something I'm looking forward to as well, is the lessons learned from, again, our project's Data Steward Instructor Training Series. After that, I'll come back to announce the next presenters, which we're also very happy to have with us, Iliri Hassani Mavriki and Francesca Fantini from the EOSC Association Task Force on Data Stewardship Curricula and Career Paths. But for now, if I can ask all the presenters, except for Yuri, to disable the cameras, and then I will give the floor and the screen to Yuri. Yuri, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. You will see my presentation, this navigation bar, just to easier support my story. Okay, so welcome and this very interesting workshop. We indeed come into the implementation actually creating and building a good recommendation for university to implement FAIR data principle in the framework of the data stewardship. So one, if you remember the Brecht's scheme of deliverable of work package 7, FAIRsFAIR, you've seen that we are currently at a stage of delivering deliverable D7.3, which is actually data stewardship and FAIR competences profile. And my presentation will be short. Okay, we made a lot of presentation on this topic, and what was delivered in February in deliverable D7.3 was actually a big work of the whole team of work package, this contribution from other partners in FAIRsFAIR project. And we ran a couple of seminars, and finally we published this and presenting and further developing data stewardship competence framework. And this is what I will try to explain. And at the end, not much in details, but at the end I will show how it can be used in university curricula, designing curricula, and selecting necessary courses and teaching topics. I will include, show you job market, how we did this analysis, and what we discovered. After that, briefly introduce actual competence framework, which are essential competence group, and again, how it's can be used in designing a curriculum using competence framework and body of knowledge. So how we did this? First of all, we had a long story of applying methodology that we call Edison data science framework to define in different competence framework, skills, and also elements how to implement this in the academic curriculum for designing educational training courses. And interesting that recently I've got also request how to use this approach to a much wider study of what is available on the market for artificial intelligence and again revisiting data science. So we used so-called data science competence groups that include data analytics, and engineering, data management, research method, and domain knowledge. And this was used when we analyzed the market, job market, and this allows us to understand what actually market require from specialists that they call data steward and also data managers. Why it is important for universities? Research data management and data stewardship and FAIR principle originated from, I would say, European research community. But university working for the whole, say, demand from industry, from government and other groups to educate specialists that will be consumed and which is demanded by say job market. So we did this analysis to understand what we need to include, how we need to reflect this. Edison Data Science Framework you can find on this link. I will not provide details. Another important part is the DAMA body of knowledge, Data Management Association body of knowledge, which is defined first time in 2009 and republished version 2 in 2017. And interesting that at that time, the industry already recognized need for data stewards and very strict data governance framework. So you can find industrial certification programs that are quite expensive for the data stewards and data managers, but they are very much industry oriented. So what we try to do this in our definition of data stewardship framework is to find a balance and also reflect requirement from research community. And this was one of the big main focus of the FAIRsFAIR project and our work package. So this slide shows a short description of what we did as a job market analysis that we collected a few hundreds of job advertisement. Interesting that Europe is very popular for data stewards, but United States even more. So there are demand for data stewards and quite strong requirement for competences. And currently we did this for our deliverable, but now we are doing more regular massive data collection to understand what currently market requires and how it changed since last year. But impression that number of data steward position is increasing. Okay, so what we discovered in the job market study. So we use the competences that I mentioned here: analytics, engineering, data management, research method, and domain knowledge. In this case, is more business oriented. So we discovered that from data stewards, most demanded surely data management. This is not surprising, but what kind of data management competences are required was interesting to understand. What we did in our another group of competences is a domain knowledge or business domain. It's clearly because data steward is actually the main guru, coordinator, and implementer of the data policy, data managed policy in organization. So they need to know a business and they need to know quite a lot of technical skills. So building data stewardship, data management program should also include a number of engineering skills like databases, data profiles, metadata, and so on. But knowledge also distributed quite wide on this different group of skills. And just for reference, to show you which kind of knowledge required on the market from data stewards, this is data management, which is quite familiar for us and for research community, for academic community. And next goes a business what managing business data, also marketing, master data management, reference data, and quite big part is a technical knowledge or engineering knowledge, I would say, not technical but engineering, that stewards need to have to know how to work with different tools. Such requirements as a knowledge of standards and knowledge best practices, and knowledge of FAIR data principle and metadata, also how to work with metadata, how to publish data, and also archiving data, and know how to work with open data, open science. And quite important competences is how to manage data and manage also data management and stewards teams in organization. Also develop an organizational policy and coordinate activity for implementation of basic data management principle, including FAIR data. FAIR data is already popular in industry, and academia cannot ignore this kind of movement. So this will be part of our discussion today. And also, data stewards need to be capable to specify requirements and supervise implementation of different tools in organization. And this makes data steward quite multifunctional, multi-competence profession. And university need to look at this, then implementing in particular elements of data stewardship and FAIR principles, and also including if university wants to initiate a data stewards the program, the whole program or specialization. And this was I told about data management group, and this slide simply lists what is required from practical or engineering skills, what to work, how to work with tools, how to work with data management infrastructure. And now next component, then we want to implement this in a curriculum, is to define body of knowledge. Body of knowledge includes the knowledge units, knowledge areas that can be directly used in the curriculum. And what this slide shows that then our team and together with support of our community was working on the adoption, FAIR adoption handbook, what was Brecht mentioned. So the community of around 100 practitioners from research organization, educational organization, went through the whole body of knowledge, definition knowledge, and ranked how this can be applicable for different group of learners, like bachelor, master, PhD, postdoc, and researcher. So this you can use directly just for designing your courses. And this diagram exactly explains how it can be done. First of all, competence. We need to understand what is competence. Competence typically defined as a combination of knowledge, skills, attitude, and actual competence that express what the candidate can do capable to do. And next, then we go to curriculum design. We need to transform this to learning outcomes that many of you know how to do this, and they are necessary in any course. They transform to body of knowledge and professional profiles. So if you want to design a curriculum or get suggestion, advice about how curriculum need to look, you need to define learning outcome, learning units based on the body of knowledge, and also, if it's also applicable, to which profession or professional group you want to target in your curriculum. So all these mechanisms are already defined, and methodology is developed, and in particular it will be implemented in the adoption handbook that you will have the separate workshop later in October. So possibly on this I will stop my presentation, because question what can be discussed is how to implement, what tools you need, but essential can be this slide. How to combine this is to make this curriculum design. Okay, Brecht, if you call for questions, or we move to another presenter.
Thank you for your presentation, Yuri. If you can stop sharing your screen.
Until you say stop sharing, if there are questions.
If you could stop sharing your screen. I don't see any questions right now, but this is a duo of presentations. So I suggest that Hugh Shanahan of the University of London and the FAIRsFAIR project continues with his presentations on the lessons learned on data stewards instructor training sessions that we organized. But I will, again, sort of encourage people. The Q&A function is open to everyone to give us some questions. After Hugh's presentation, we will have an opportunity to already ask the presenters the first questions. That being said, Hugh, floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, Brecht. If it's okay, I'll just share my screen initially. Right. All right. So as of just a quick sanity check, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Thank you very much. And yeah, and you've also answered my other question, which is you can all hear me, just to be absolutely sure. Okay, great. Let me just make sure I've got to set my timer so I'm on time. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you all very much for coming along today. It's really gratifying to know that there are so many people who really want to learn here. My thanks to Yuri for explaining the competence framework. That's a really important work which provides a deep dive into what's required and what needs to be needs to be thought, and that's and as a result he's kind of given me the freedom to go in a somewhat different direction here. In particular, what I want to do is instead of talking about the curriculum and what to teach, what I'd like to focus on mostly here is the requirements from people on the ground and understanding where we are right now in terms of the people who are at, if I use this English phrase, the sharp end of the stick, the people who are in this role doing this delivery. So let me, so I'm working in a different work package from Brecht and Federica and Yuri and so on, which is very much focused on actual training. And if I can go to the next page, talk about the original idea that we had. which 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, which was that we already had a very successful school series, which runs over 2 weeks, which is oriented towards early career researchers. The very sort of grand vision was that we would run this school, a school for data stewards, in parallel with the early career researchers. So they would, the data stewards would learn their materials, they would get that deep dive in what needs to be covered, but also they'd be learning together in parallel with ECRs, and both kind of groups of people would kind of be able to see what the other person is doing, and that we'd have joint exercises and so on. Now, I have to be blunt and say that this was actually a somewhat flawed vision, all right? And why was that? Well, the first thing to note is that, very, very hard biology kicked in, and suddenly we had to go from running things in terms of physical 2-week school into into virtual delivery. But that's only the kind of nub of that, and it doesn't address a basic point, which is, while early career researchers can be allocated 2 weeks of their time to go and attend a school, data stewards are professionals who are employed in their role, and it's hard for them to talk to their bosses and say, can I take 2 weeks off to go and attend that school. The other point was, so what we did was at that stage, was to actually have a series of discussions and evolve the school that we have, the training events that we have. And we did that with a variety of different regional groupings. And to know what happened was that we ran a series of virtual events and kind of iteratively improved what we were doing. And this was from a whole variety of different sort of regional groupings. So initially with institutions in the north of England, Manchester, University of Manchester and Leeds, then on to Ghent University in Belgium, the Irish grouping, North, and most recently Gdansk, based in Poland. And we kind of came up with a number of realities here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some plots here, which were sort of taken at the workshops that we ran, but they kind of represent what was happening in terms of the conversations that we are having with these various different groupings. And just to note, I think, although you might say, well, you've only done a number of different regions here, I would take a stab and say that actually, if you looked across regions across Europe, you're going to see a fairly similar sort of picture. So the first thing to note is that data stewards, or the people who are in a role which has the overlap with being a data steward, are generally very, very new to their role. So when we asked that question at both the events that we ran for the University of Ghent and for North in Ireland, the vast majority of people have been employed in their role for less than 6 months. So this is really new, all right? The other point is that data stewards are isolated, might be quite a strong word, but they're certainly in very small groupings. So when we ask that question, where are you in a team? What's your sort of, what size of team are you working in? Again, we have this situation where a large chunk of them are literally just on their own within, and we're talking about an individual institution here. Or else there's others who are in a small team. So if you think about it, a higher education institution, a HEI or an RI, where these people are generally new to their job and they're really, really in a small grouping. They've been told, in effect, get on with things. Other findings were that many people are doing the role of data stewardship but they don't have that job title. And it's, you've got this profusion of different job titles that are out there: data manager, research data manager, librarian, and so on. The other thing that stood out was that in the events that we were running, there was really a clear demand for just very, very practical advice, particularly on data management plans, primarily because that's what people really, really need to because they're really, really being overwhelmed with researchers and so on, say, I have to have a DMP written, help me with this, because this is mandated by my funding body. Their role really, really requires a significant amount of training and just communication. There's interest in more advanced topics, but really it was clear that we couldn't deal with that in the sort of envelope that we have at the present moment. So we kind of have to very much focus on the basics. Different regions, these are sort of common things. The things that was different was that different regions have different levels of contact with their communities. So in terms of the actual training that we implemented, what we found, what we sort of converged on was a 3 half-day event, which was spread out over a week. So Monday morning, Wednesday morning, and a Friday morning. And there's when you share the link, we have the online example here. And that I think was for, that was for the last one for Ghent, or for Gdansk, which was the most sort of concentrated case. So in day one, we're introducing people to the idea of what does being a data steward mean, introducing them to a FAIRsFAIR tool called FAIRaware. We spend most of the time talking about pedagogy, telling them, okay, which is, even if this is for most of them, they've done that pedagogy before, just to remind them of that. And to point out to useful things like the EOS Pillar Training Catalog. Day two, we talk about open and responsible research. We have a team exercise on DMPs, and then there's a panel from representatives from other regions. We also have a little bit of an icebreaker so that people could actually go and talk to themselves, talk with other people that are there. The third day was on the RDM service model, something called the RISE tool. So in other words, how do you improve the RDM services within your institution? And then at the very end, there's a group discussion on what are the shared goals of that community of attendees. Typically, we'd have around 30 attendees who are coming from multiple institutions, but from one region or country. So the Irish event, institutions across Ireland, the event run from Gdansk, from groups all over Poland, and so on. There is sort of webinars and so on, but there's a very strong emphasis on teamwork, so that these individuals who often don't know each other have a chance to sort of break the ice and get to know each other. And we encourage that very much. The thing that's really, really important that we're trying to aim for is to tell these people to build themselves as communities. So let me now focus on lessons learned. And again, this is very, very broad lessons. It's not so much about curriculum and so on. The first thing I would say is that if you are looking particularly at getting training up people who are going to be instructor trainers themselves in data stewardship, you need to focus actually your effort on building them up as a community. They're very new, they're very much on their own. They need to realize that, oh, actually just down the road from them, there are other people who are very much in the same situation. And there's so many things that they can share and collaborate on, whether it's policy development, figuring out what materials are useful for them, and so on. This is really, really important. For short training events like what we're doing, 3 half days, we have to prioritize what's being done. And in that respect, we've kind of, if I use this phrase, all the data stewardship that you can use. In other words, the thing that's coming at them right now very hard is saying, people asking, how do I write DMPs? So yeah, getting them up to speed on those things, working together on that. There's room for more advanced topics, but it's more about once you get the community started, they can then start saying, okay, here are the gaps in our knowledge in that, and start pulling in the right people for that. Finally, it's important to remind them of the pedagogy. So they have to do huge amounts of communications, but they need to actually remind themselves, okay, there are, you know, instead of rushing to sort of like put together the next PowerPoint presentation, they need to say, okay, think about lesson plans. How am I going to design my what I'm teaching? Is even a training event, which people often kind of, yeah, let's organize a training event. Is that actually the right thing to do? Or is, for example, documentation the right process to do here? One last thing I will also say is that we've got 2 more training sessions, and then we're all done, which is, these are going to be open to all, although we'll have up to 40 participants per session. That'll run again on the week of November 29th and the week of December the 6th. So the text, the description of that and link to it, you can find here. The deadline for applications is October the 15th, and I'd recommend you all to if you're interested, please have a look. Please have a look at that. The application form is very short. It's very, very lightweight. Okay, so at this point, I have probably, I've gone over by 3.5 minutes. My apologies. So at this stage, I'm going to stop the share if anybody has any questions at this point.
Thank you for that presentation, Hugh. No worries in going over time a little bit. That was a very interesting presentation. And there are some questions I am seeing. Marianne Grootveld, Hugh, for you, is asking, well, she's thanking you for sharing the lessons learned, and I'm joining her in that. But she's asking, what do you then see as the core of remind them of pedagogy?
Oh, okay. So actually, I should also have, that reminds me to have put up my acknowledgements slide, which was very naughty of me, and which is a very cheap way, Marion, that's a very cheap way of me pointing you to Lina Stupinkas and Helen Clare, who ran the pedagogy sessions on there. So in terms of that core is, first of all, to stop and ask the question, is training the right thing to do? So in other words, there's always a great urge for people to, oh, you know, organize some training on X, and actually is to stop and say, is training the right sort of path for some particular area, or is just providing the right documentation the right sorts of things? The other sort of basics is then to say, okay, we're going to do some training, so then let's organize a lesson plan. All right, what are we going to cover here? How are we going to assess this? What's the type of audience that's there? I think those are the most sort of, I mean, this is pedagogy 101 that we're covering here. But those are probably the most sort of important things to remind people of. I think the other implicit lesson that we're having is that people should not feel they should try and learn everything. That actually, if they build up that community, then, you know, I'm at HEI 1. I can contact HEI 2 because I know they cover this material. So you know what, we'll share our training and we'll work together in that respect. I hope that addresses your question there, Marion, but if it's missing anything, please say so.
Thank you, Hugh. Meanwhile, I see that in the chat, there are a number of thank yous coming in for your talk today, but also for the training that someone followed in Ghent in June. There was actually, I had a question for you, Hugh, as well, in terms of the community building, but I just at the right time, I see that that similar question is popping up from one of the participants. Ellen Leenaert is asking, what do you recommend regarding community building? And this is a question I also wanted to point out, because clearly from your presentation, you get the importance that there is a sense of isolation still. And I think that is why you're sort of emphasizing community building that much. And Ellen here is asking essentially sort of what would you recommend? Could you maybe expand on that a little bit further?
So Helen, I wish I could sort of say to you, okay, here's the, you know, the 1, 2, 3 that does things. But again, I would focus on very much the basics here, which is number one, to get people to, one of the things that we try to do, although I think it's always been never quite, I think got critical mass in any of the sessions, was to say to people, okay, give them 20 minutes at the, or a half an hour at the end of the workshop to say, okay, you know each other a little bit better. What do you want to do over the next 6 months? And I think that felt a little bit like we're sort of pushing people and, you know, to say, go and do things. And maybe people felt still a little bit unsure about themselves. But quite practical small steps is to first of all, say to them, have a common means for communication, all right? Put together a mailing list so that you can start swapping ideas. And, you know, we have the FAIR Data Forum is something which is coming out of FAIRsFAIR. Actually, I'll put the link in there. And we've advised, you know, if people would like, you know, you can get yourself registered onto the FAIR Data Forum, and then we can, you know, let us know, and we can set up community pages and so on, so that people can get in touch. But likewise, if people just want to have like one email address, you know, that they can contact their colleagues in the community, that itself is just one thing that's there. I think encouraging them to sort of say, well, what's common goals? What can you get done for the next 6 months? Even if they can't do it there, say, look, get together. And even so, things like saying, hey, suppose one institution decides to run some sort of training. Why not invite other people from other institutions to come along to that, even if it's just there to sort of shadow it and see what that's like. Does it work? You know, they can go, oh, okay, that's an interesting idea, or hadn't thought about it, or, you know, to learn lessons, and also maybe to provide feedback. And even if somebody says, oh, could you spend 15 minutes talking about X? All of these things are there, and build that up. I think those are very much the first steps. I wish I could say to you finally that I'm some sort of expert with respect to building communities. No. If somebody can point me to the textbook that says this is how you build communities, please let me know, because it's taken me 2.5 years to realize this is very, very important, and we need to do this. I hope that addresses your question.
I'm sure it does. Thank you for expanding on this a little bit. Perhaps Yuri, if you can come on screen, I'd love to ask you a question as well. And I wanted to sort of ask a pretty broad question, perhaps, is sort of, you know, we've seen Hugh's presentation now, and sort of the nitty-gritty, if you will, of training and community building. How do you see the connections sort of with your presentation about the competence framework, body of knowledge? Could you sort of expand a little bit on how you see the connection between those two, perhaps?
What Hugh explained is given a basic knowledge. What was people like it very much is a pedagogical introduction, refreshment, and this is pedagogical. Then we worked on the adoption handbook. We needed also revisit basics in pedagogical and basics in the competence definition. Otherwise, it would be difficult for, say, trainers to understand how to deliver the knowledge and, achieve their training outcome. So, and actually, in many cases, introduction or starting position of data stewards require a lot of, say, understanding where the candidate came and which conditions, and they need to communicate, cooperate. So data stewards is not for solemn programmer or solemn data manager who only knows how to write data management plan. They need to talk a lot of and knowledge of this, what to talk, what is goes beyond the question that has come from individual researcher. Well, how you write a data management plan? Yeah, this is template, but why is this? Why is this? So knowing the basic all relations and what comes next, it's quite effective for data stewards to good set in their position, build a career. Always we think about not just came and stop in this position or go to another organization, but if data stewards will come to organization, probably they will see that there is opportunity, become a chief data officer or chief data stewards. So all this knowledge are essential, and this can be even taught in the academic curricula.
Thank you. So thank you to both presenters. I see there's more questions in the Q&A function. We have to move on to the next presenters, but I would sort of encourage our presenters to have a look at the Q&A box and perhaps type a couple of answers. I think there's some relevant questions in there. Apologies to the people who asked them, but we do have to move on with the program.
Brecht, we can type answers and people will read. At least I see one of question that I can
a possibility to type. So perfect. While that's happening in the background, I'm moving on to two speakers who I'm very happy to introduce here. Ilira Sani Mavriki of the Technical University, the Graz University of Technology in Austria, and Francesca Frontini of the Institute of Computational Linguistics in Italy. They will be talking about something I'm personally very much looking forward to, is the EOSC Association Task Force on Data Stewardship, Curricula and Career Paths. So I will give you the floor, and
I will begin, and then Ilira will take over. So I'm sharing my screen now.
Perfect, thank you.
You should now see the presentation, and I'm going to make it
we
full
can
screen.
See the presentation, yes.
Okay. So yeah, thanks a lot everyone for having us here. So I'm Francesca Frontini, and together with Ilira, we will introduce you to this new, actually newly created task force for data stewardship and career paths of the EOSC. So to be clear here, this and other task forces, EOSC task forces, haven't yet started their activities. So here today it's more about letting you know that, signaling that we are there and getting input from all of you. So according to the intentions of the EOSC, the EOSC task forces are structures that allow the association members and others to help steer the implementation of the EOSC. The task forces it's very important that they should liaise with other EOSC projects and offer feedback and activity. And they should identify gaps and areas of investment to input to the strategic research and innovation agenda. It is for EOSC association, so the membership is open to EOSC association members, but externals can also participate to the activities. So Just to give you a quick overview, this is the number of task forces which were proposed and actually implemented. And as you can see, there's a number of topics that are of relevance for the European Open Science Cloud and its creation. And later I can put also this reference in the chat. But of course, there's three that might have drawn your attention, which concern research careers and curricula, which include hours on data stewardship, but also one on researchers' careers, and one which is more handling the national side of things in terms of research careers. So this is us. And so there was a timeline which was kind of strict to kickstart the creation of these task forces. So first of all, you might have seen the call for volunteers, the first call for volunteers, which aimed at putting together a first group of people who then went on and wrote the charter of these task forces. That is to say, the document where we define the scope and modus operandi of these task forces. The charters were presented at the ESC Symposium in June, and then there was a second call for members, which basically ended at, I think it was the end of July, not the end of June, but I might have that might have been a typo. And then now we are at the end of the application and selection procedures, and we have almost of our members selected, and the activities of the task force will begin shortly. So as for the charter, so this document that Ilya will present a little in a little while, basically we had to define the main aims, the core activities, the planned duration, the working methodology, the dependencies, and membership rules. And here I want to stress the importance of the dependencies part, because the EOSC was very adamant that these task forces should not reinvent the wheel, but really incorporate all previous work done and work as much as possible with all relevant initiatives, which is, of course, also why we're here today. So as for the selection of members, also there were criteria, which were, of course, competence, skills, prioritized also for priority, also for members and observers of the EOSC Association, ensure community input, include key project representatives if possible, and of course ensure diversity and balance. So this is the coordinate. So these are the names of the coordinators of the drafting of the Data Stewardship Charter. So alongside Idil and I, we worked with Vera Matzer from EMBL, who could not be here today, but she was an important part of the team, and with a group of around 10 volunteers. So we did not do very well in terms of gender balance, but we were a good mix in respect, in other respects, for instance, also in disciplinary terms. Oops. Okay, so we basically, the first draft was written by myself and the other colleagues, Vera and Ilira, but then we collected input from the volunteers, and then a final version was submitted as I said, and you can find it already available online. And now I'm going to hand over to Ilira for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Francesca. And I would like also to thank the host for inviting us to today's workshop. And I will be giving an overview of the Charter of Data Stewardship Curricula and Career Paths. So our approach when drafting the Charter was to try to build on previous work as much as possible. So we identified that the relevant reports and initiatives that outcomes of which can be considered for this task force. So one of the most important ones and the related ones is the report of digital skills for fair and open science working group. And we also collected a list of relevant initiatives and stakeholders. So in terms of RDA, then the national initiative in Netherlands and Denmark, and indeed Edison Data Science Framework will play a huge role in the work of this task force. And all the results that were presented today, we are very keen to continue the collaboration with actors behind the results that you just presented, because I think it's a very good basis for our upcoming work. And what another important point was to try to align with other task forces, and especially with research career recognition and credits, and with the upskilling task force within EOSC Association. So we, at the initial phase of charter drafting, we had exchange meetings with these two task forces. Next slide, please. So what is the aim of data stewardship curricula and career paths task force? We identified two main goals. So we, together with all the members, we want to define data steward job roles and curricula to ensure that these are recognized and aligned across Europe. And here we will pay attention to all the work that has been done in different projects and in different initiatives. Then we want to develop recommendations for potential career paths, taking into account appropriate recognition and rewards for data management activities. And of course, all the work that has been done within FAIRsFAIR project, I think it's a very good basis also to accomplish this second goal. The scope of the task force. So we want to focus firstly on data stewards roles and on the core set of competencies and skills. But we have seen also from today's presentation, there are always some specific skills, some specialization skills that are requested from data stewards, and these depend on a setting. We also want to recognize and make sure that this overlap with other roles is very well handled within the task force. So there are other roles similar to data steward roles, such as data curators, EOSC educators, data scientists, or even research software engineers. These are the roles that are identified also in previous work. And we make sure that the dependencies are also included in the charter. And here is again the list of all dependencies that we recognize. And of course, this can be extended, especially when we start with the work in the task force. So I saw that the interest group RDA professionalization data stewardship is also mentioned in the chat. So there is another RDA IG, so education and training on handling of research data. So we want to make sure that we communicate from the beginning with the chairs of these two IGs, and there is an exchange of information with the members of this task force. Next slide, please. In the charter, we defined also some core activities. So first of all, stakeholder management and dissemination. Of course, it's very important. We want to involve all identified stakeholders from the beginning. So even though data stewardship is a keyword in the field of research data management, there are still different understandings behind this concept. So at least for the work within the task force, we want to make sure that we have a common understanding what data stewardship is from the beginning. Then, as a second activity, we want to define a minimal data stewardship curricula, taking into account the previous work. So we structure this into data stewards roles, competency profiles for data stewards, and levels of training. Then the next activity is in regard to career paths for data stewards and associated roles. So we want to find out how available roles map into data stewards in international context. And of course, one of the important aspects is the recognition and rewards for data management activities. As a fourth activity, we want to identify some practical use cases and use those as implementation examples within the task force. Next slide, please. We defined also a working methodology. So we want to release the work in versions in order to incorporate feedback and lessons learned from the stakeholders and from the community. We want to ensure a co-creation process, especially between theoretical development and implementation examples, because as we also saw in previous presentations, so there are differences when it comes to apply those recommendations that come from different projects and initiatives. We want to hold public consultations through surveys, interviews, discussion workshops with stakeholders across all activities. And of course, as already mentioned, we want to align with relevant task forces to optimize efforts and also relevant initiatives and projects. And we want to collect use cases not only within the task force, but also we want to engage a larger community in this regard. Next slide, please. So in particular, here just to make clear how the selection of members was conducted. So we defined also some roles within the task force. All the task forces will have 2 co-chairs, and we decided to have also co-task leaders, so 2 task leaders per task. And then the third role are general task force members. So we applied all the general EOS criteria when in the selection process, and we defined also some additional criteria for this task force. So we thought it would be good to have a spread of contributors across tasks 2 to 4. Then we paid attention if the applicants also explicitly pointed out if they want to serve as co-chair or co-task leader. And the commitment to provide significant input for the duration of the task force was one of the most important points. Of course, we asked also in the community if there are already implementation examples that can be identified at the beginning of our activities. The task force data stewardship curricula and career path is anticipated to last for 2 years. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps? Membership should be announced soon from EOSC Association, and then the first meeting will be arranged for the upcoming weeks. Chairs will be also appointment from the board of directors of EOSC Association, and then it is planned that from October the activities in the task force will start. And as a key message or as a takeaway message for us and for all the members of this task force, is important to align with ongoing activities and keep stakeholders in the loop. Thanks a lot. In the last slide, we provided all the references and all the dependencies that we identified so far. but we are keen to learn about other initiatives, and of course this list can be extended. Thanks a lot, and we are happy now to answer questions.
Yes, thank you so much for that presentation. This is incredibly relevant, and I'm sure people have sort of picked up on sort of the connections between all the presentations. Indeed, as mentioned, we have some time for Q&A, not too much, but if anyone wants to type in their question on the Q&A function. Meanwhile, I do have a question. Since I sort of work to represent universities at EUA, I perhaps have a question for our two presenters, more in general about sort of EOSC and how it's developing right now. Obviously, there's a lot of work going on right now. But if I'm sort of a university or working for a university, perhaps sometimes I think, well, how can I get engaged with EOSC? Like, what is relevant for me right now? How do I follow up? How do I contact people? So where is my place in this if I'm interested? So maybe you can have a bit of reflection on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so of course this was an open call addressed firstly to members and observers of EOSC Association. So every university that has either a status of a member or observer got the notification, and then I guess this was an internal process. So each member decided whom to nominate. So which candidates from a particular university should apply for particular task forces. So this was a general process, and but it was not only limited to members and observers of EOSC Association. So this was also announced publicly, and now the selection process is almost finished. So I think the membership will be announced soon, and it is anticipated that the task force starts the activities with the selected members. But I guess there are always possibilities to enlarge this group, and the community involvement is very much appreciated. So we will find ways how to communicate the first publicly held workshops, how to disseminate our first results. But I think the main communication goes through EOSC Association membership. So, and I guess there we have also a spread of members across different disciplines and different universities. So this will be a to-do of our members to try to disseminate the results as much as possible and as broadly as possible.
I may add just a quick notice. Of course, the first step would be also to find out if your university or institution is already part of the EOSC. I will put a link in the chat or to the list of the actual members, and then get in touch maybe with the people that are kind of representing the institution, the EOSC. This would probably help, and there are also a number of mailing lists that you can subscribe to. I think that the EOSC association wanted to ensure that the activities of the task forces can be followed, at least for these intermediate results, by everyone. They haven't yet defined a clear methodology for that, but probably there will be some sort of public documents, etc. So we could make sure that you have all the references if you want to follow these activities.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those answers. I'm not seeing any further questions for the moment. So also I think it's time for us to move on to the breakout sessions, but thank you again for this presentation. I think this is incredibly relevant work, and then obviously we hope that indeed it is sort of the members you're working with. We hope that this sort of continues to expand, and EUA, for example, is also heavily involved with this. I'll share my screen for a minute just to announce where we're going next, because we're starting now with the breakout sessions. And I'm just very briefly trying to figure out how to do all of this. There you go. Here is a slide saying that we're now going to the breakout room discussions on good practices from universities. And here's a couple of questions. These questions will be shared within the breakout groups as well, but I'm just putting them up here because that's sort of the next step of this event. We've had these presentations, which I think were incredibly relevant to reflect on, but now we also want to hear from you, from the participants.
Okay. So these are questions, and we will. Thank you for all who stay in this workshop, this room. We really interested to understand how we can do better, how we can help you in both questions that were Q&A tab. Quite interesting already for us. This also means that many people are not only from universities, but also from a research organization. So we are interested to know how we help to implement FAIR principles in university teaching. I am myself struggling for a couple of years at least to implement this in our University of Amsterdam. Reason for this, the problem that curriculum and programs are overloaded. So what we do currently at University of Amsterdam, we include FAIR principle and data management as a one lecture, one seminar in so-called professional skills preparation. And this is quite effective. Also, our teachers are aware about availability of materials, training materials on FAIR, on data management. And I don't know if they use them or not, but still this was a background or context of the first question. How would you understand, and if you ready to implement, or what you need to implement them in your curriculum? If you are a program manager or a lecturer or practice actually teacher. Next question is, I already explained that there are difficulty of implementing. So if we want to, bullet number 2, if we want to implement, we need to understand how and possibly understand the barriers and problems. One of them is overloaded curriculum for all, especially computer science professions is so overloaded, it's difficult. Because why? Because technology are changing continuously, and students are very demanding for teaching, for what they want to learn, and who can help. The next question is what are existing channels and paths to promote FAIR to university teaching in curricula? Surely individual teachers, program managers, rector, dean, and so on. Do you understand this? How you would already did this and how to use? Okay, now I understand that we have not only university, so the same questions, this some modification apply to a research organization. If a research organization wants to establish quite solid data management, they need to do training, they need to support from management, from council, research council, scientific council, and so on. And surely final question, what we can do for you? What materials, individual consultation, I would say, co-design, co-creation of your program. So we are happy to do this. And surely not only during the duration of the FAIRsFAIR project, but also after. It will be continued in other projects, but some members will also be happy to be involved in the maintenance of what we did. Okay, and now I finished. Now we listen. People can type, can put into chat comments, and please let us use our time best, or just voice. And thanks, Claudia, that you are typing. And
yeah, Marianne too. So
yeah, it's very, very, very nice. I'm happy. I see it's quite, I realized that community is something that interests people very much. And I think it's many projects, especially EOSC task force, need also to take this into account, that people want to be in a community. Maybe a social network or social kind of formation for data stewards.
Yuri, perhaps now's the time to stop sharing your screen. I think everyone's in the document, so we can also see each other as people might want to talk.
Okay, indeed. No problem, but everybody can follow individually in there.
So I see people are writing in the document, but meanwhile also here in the breakout session, if anybody wants to go on screen, maybe add a couple of reflections, notes, you're more than welcome.
So I have a question, I suppose, rather than an answer. At what level do people start to introduce this stuff to the curriculum? Is it at undergraduate level, at postgraduate level, at PhD level? I'm just really interested to hear other people's experiences on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Jenny from UCD in Ireland, I should have said.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And definitely we will first let people from audience to speak. Please unmute yourself and speak.
I'm Francesca. You heard me a second ago. So I would also like to stress, maybe that someone can say something more about it, but the role also of research infrastructures and more generally of similar disciplinary initiatives, because I personally am currently one of the directors of Clarineric, which is in the social sciences and humanities domain. And sometimes I find it a bit difficult to introduce the topic of fair open science in curricula where there is not a disciplinary angle, but as soon as you start to give concrete examples of resources, tools, data that has been, for instance, made fair, shared on our repositories, for instance, things become much more clear. So maybe you have similar experiences. I'm really very curious to hear about it.
Hi, I can come with an answer to Jenny's question also. My name is Shay Sundstøl. I work at the University of Southeastern Norway in Bø. And I teach a PhD course, an introductory course where we do introduce FAIR principles at the PhD level. And a lot of that is because I don't know how it works where everybody else is, but there's obviously the question of ownership of data. If the data can be shared and who owns it. I do also, when I talk to master students, I do try to present to them information about FAIR data and try to encourage them to share their data. But as they are not employees, they own their own data, so they can do what they want with it. They don't have to share it, whereas they are required at the PhD level to share their data, if with very few exceptions. So at that level, it's more important that they understand how to make it incorporate the FAIR principles, findable, interoperable, etc. So we do it at the PhD level. Of course, we try to work with the faculty and staff, but we also find that people who are established and have their habits and their patterns and the routines are impossible to change. So we think that the systematic change that needs to happen to make open data and sharing data the standard needs to come. You need to get them when they're in their early stages, just starting, and let it build up over time. So yeah, short answer, PhD level, but as master's level when possible.
I see that Hugh has his hand up, but before we get there, I just want to add that from the FAIRsFAIR project, we're seeing that it depends on the national and regional context at times, where people tend to usually start at the doctoral level. And this is sort of confirmed in surveys that we've done, that there is more available at the doctoral level than at bachelor and master. And then in interviews that we've done recently for the Good Practices report, and this will be included, we have seen that in depending also the institutional setup, depending on the context, sometimes people say, well, it is just easier for us to start there because it's more clear cut how to provide it for all doctoral candidates, either voluntary or mandatory. And it's you have to start somewhere, is essentially so what we're getting. But there is also, if we then ask, are there any plans? There is usually the idea like, yes, this is not intended just for the doctoral level. This is something we would want to expand. It's just that, well, it takes a while. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. So, I mean, with the FAIRsFAIR project, we are attentive to this. It is really a part of it. Okay, what is the difference in situation between bachelor, master, and doctoral level? Bachelor and master being different from the doctoral level, of course. Hugh, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi Jenny. So yeah, just to reiterate the points that Shane Brecht have already made. So for the CODATA RDA schools, that's for early career researchers, and we're very broad in that definition. So from MSc students to postdocs 2-3 years after PhDs, and there, it's not all FAIR all the time. There's a research data management module in there, and it will sort of say there's a thing called FAIR, and this explaining what's going on there. So and yeah, for all of those students, they're like, wow, never knew this. Although admittedly, the schools are very much oriented to students from low and middle income countries. As a counter example, there is in Oxford, in the engineering department there, Susanna Sunta-Sansone runs, I believe she does an undergraduate module in research data management for the engineers. I don't know if she covers FAIR in there, but that, you could certainly sort of ping her just to see what she's doing. In conversations with her, I know that it's a bit of a struggle she finds, but that just might be Oxford engineering students, so.
Great, thank you all for your answers. That's really, really helpful. And one of the things I've been asked to do this year is to start introducing data literacy to undergraduates. So I think this is going to be the starting point of the conversation that hopefully will continue on throughout their academic careers. So thanks everyone for your answers. That's really, really helpful.
Can I say one more thing, just if there's a pause? I think so. Marion had a really nice kind of question in the chat, which was about the barrier question, which is, FAIR, bandying around the term FAIR might seem a barrier, like another buzzword, and we haven't even started on talking about CARE principles and all of that jazz. I would tend to, there's that school of thought which says, don't mention FAIR at all to researchers, because that's sort of like talking about accountancy standards, and so, you know, it might be worth asking, do people feel that, like, there's one principle which says, explain the utility, do these things, and that makes you more efficient and effective, and that's what researchers will grab onto. Or there's, and you kind of teach FAIR through that way, or else there's here are the FAIR principles, and then sort of point out the utility. And maybe it'd be worth, Marion, you might want to jump in here as well, but what are people's thoughts on that perspective?
If I can jump in there, Hugh, because I asked the question. I think good advertising is invisible, and I think that is one of the arguments we should not mention FAIR too often in groups that are not familiar with it. Another argument perhaps for not using the term so much as enforcing the underlying principles is that FAIR in itself is not an end goal. It is a means. And I think it is a means towards reusability. And this is also saying that we should focus on the real advantages and not too much perhaps on the way towards reaching them. So I think there is a whole set of arguments why we might want to be more silent about the term FAIR data principles, and in particular when we expand FAIR to other things than data. And maybe that will help to get it more embedded in the real life of researchers of whatever degree or status.
Okay, I see there's more hands being raised. Matthijs Sloop, I think you're one of the first to raise your hand.
First, apologies. It's my day off, so I have a little baby and a toddler running around. So I was a bit hesitant to talk, but I think it's interesting to tell you guys about what we're doing in Maastricht. So we had the same issue that it was people were a bit hesitant to try out FAIR. And so we thought of what's a good low threshold way to get people involved. And we started these FAIR coffee lectures where we present smaller projects with FAIR, where for instance PhD students do a FAIR project, and we try to to get people interested, and then push them towards let's say a FAIR Essentials workshop. And that FAIR Essentials workshop is also more introductory, but goes a lot more in depth and is very hands-on. And then the next step would be to do more in an advanced FAIR workshop, but we haven't built that one yet. So we're still trying to get more people to follow the FAIR Essentials workshop. And also there is, for every PhD student, there is a compulsory research data management course. And these have a big part of these courses is about open science and about FAIR data. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And it's good to know the next generation's already in the background.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that Minaza Andrabi, you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, hi. So I work in the University of Manchester with Professor Carol Gobble, so one of the principal persons involved in defining FAIR. So we are at the heart of it. But so I have been now hearing about FAIR for 2 years in this job, and I can, I know people are still not aware. Like till 2 years ago, till I came to the lab working for Carol, I had no idea about FAIR, because although I was a postdoc in bioinformatics and we were not doing it. But my experience with this is that we should keep introducing FAIR. But I attended a very good talk by Sarah Jones, which was, again, she's from an EOSC forum, and she really rightly said FAIR is like, it takes a village, like we say, it takes a village to raise a baby. So it takes a village to make the data fair. because when we are talking about FAIR to people, we also have to tell them that this is the infrastructure you will get, this is the help you will get, this is the guidance you will get. So I think it is very important we introduce FAIR and give this guidance at a master's level when people start doing their MSc projects, 6 months research projects. So the earlier we start, the better it is. Unlike for people like me who are now working full-time in FAIR, till 2 years ago, they had no clue, absolutely no clue.
Indeed, that's sort of the importance of not waiting too late here. I see that Liv Kvare has her hand raised, but then actually in reality.
Yeah, I want to echo what was said earlier about the FAIR is not a goal in itself. I think sometimes we love this catchy acronym because we work with data management, and it's an easy way maybe to communicate with the policymakers, with the research administration. When we speak with the rector's office, we can like pin it down. What do we mean in an easy way? But when we communicate with the students, PhDs and researchers, I think we need to dig it down to what does this actually mean for them. So when we communicate with researchers who want to complete their data management plan, we need to help them to use the words in a way that it makes sense for their project. And introducing FAIR for master students, I think it's only relevant if their training is to work as data stewards. Otherwise, I would say that for master students, we need to teach them how they can use data management to make sure the quality of the research projects are as good as possible and that they're not losing data. And that to think about what it means for them and how the principles and the ideas embedded in the FAIR principles can be used to enrich the research quality. Because I think that's what we have to promote as a goal, to make this part of the way researchers and students think, is how can you use good data management practice to enhance the quality of the research.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good comment. I'm seeing that then also Vincent Gaillard from EUA has her hand raised.
Hello, hello to all. Sorry, it takes sometimes a while to. I had a question related to a comment in the shared document. So it's a comment on what's on the guiding question on the type of support that could be offered by EUA, FAIRsFAIR, and the EOS community. And there was something I found very interesting related to the focusing and pointing on the difficulties on reusing the data, not just on sharing, but the difficulties that come when the data is not fair, and so that it can be difficult. I really see this as something that would be more on the side of the community, well, the FAIRsFAIR project. But I was wondering if the person who had made that comment could develop a bit on how EUA as an umbrella organization could support here, because the way I would see it is that maybe this is more something that would be related to research communities, researchers. And so, yeah, that was more of a question, how we could do that at the level of EUA, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Actually, it was my suggestion, so it's Marianne again. But I'm not that familiar with the EUA perspective, so my background is in an organization that runs a long-term data repository. So we have a load of probably valuable data, and we're looking for people who want to reuse it. And as far as I know, it's in many disciplines a good practice that I think research master students work with existing data to learn the trade in a sense. And that could be perhaps an opportunity to get into this discussion. Why do you trust some existing data more than others? Well, perhaps they're better documented or stuff like that. And that relates, I think, to the whole ambition and vision of practice of open and fair, that could be context. And I assume there are huge differences across disciplines in reusing data. And I know there can be good grounds for hesitating to trust existing data, but I think that is all part of the deal of promoting the fair data principles. So maybe that is part of an answer, but I leave more of an answer to those of you who are more familiar in actually teaching at universities.
Indeed, if anyone wants to come in with their reflections. Well, for the moment, I'm seeing a lot of people typing into the written document. I'm seeing the chat being very lively. Are there any sort of final comments that people still wanted to make live here? Otherwise, we'll sort of slowly go towards the end of the discussion. Okay. I have a couple of final announcements at the end of this workshop, but perhaps Yuri, since University of Amsterdam is online, but still hosting this workshop. Yuri, perhaps you want to come in with some final thoughts after everything that you've presented and also heard in the last 2 hours.
Thank you. So for attending this workshop, also for comments. Indeed, I already browse comments in the shared doc, and I see that they are very useful. And what I mentioned introducing this discussion is that we created a lot. We already did a lot of work. Now we want, we need to stop talking. We need to listen, and after that, start another say stage of implementing in curriculum and data stewardship and so on. So what at least I see our goal is achieved to some extent, and we will be happy to work these comments received in the say written form in the shared doc, and I think we will agree that we will keep this document at least for maybe 1-2 days. Maybe somebody wants to add. Surely we make a snapshot of current discussion, and I don't have more pleasure than thank you all for contribution and for feedback on our work and advice for future work.
Yeah, I also want to thank you, of course, for your contribution. I'm going to share my screen just to end on an announcement for the next couple of events that we are organizing. Just going to, here we go. So this was our first workshop after the summer break, where we talked more about the competence framework. We have new events coming up, and if you remember from the introduction, we are delivering 2 big practical tools, an adoption handbook and a good practices report in December. The next 2 events will each of them focus on bringing already a preliminary version to a wider audience, get basically a last minute feedback or last chance to get feedback on the preliminary versions before we finish them in December. And that is that we are going to be present at the Open Science Fair, which is very soon, 20th of September. We will be having a stakeholder workshop, learning lessons from fair data implementation, the good practices from universities across Europe. This is focused on the good practices report we're developing. We'll have my colleague Federica Garbulia will be presenting for the very first time publicly Some of the lessons learned we have learned from the interviews we've been doing with universities about their experiences. I've referred to it just now during the discussion, but more of that we will be presenting and discussing during the Open Science Fair. In a month from now, 12th of October, we will also be presenting in a webinar hosted by the University of Göttingen, practical implementation of FAIR-related content in university curricula and teaching. This will be focused on the other big deliverable of our work package in the FAIRsFAIR project, the adoption handbook. My colleague Claudia has been working for a very long time and together with a lot of people, including you, but many others, sorry for forgetting all the names, on this adoption handbook. And we're very happy next month to give sort of a public presentation of where this adoption handbook is. It'll be close to final. So we're very happy to sort of present it and get feedback that will help us to finalize it and push it over the finish line by the end of the year. So those are the last two events, I think, from our work package that we've planned for the moment. You can find online on the FAIRsFAIR website all the information in terms of agendas, also the opportunity to register. And with that being said, I can only thank everyone. I can only thank everyone who presented, everyone who participated today. Obviously, I'll repeat our apologies for the technical challenges. Thank you for bearing with us. And thank you still for making this very lively discussion towards the end. With that being said, it's about lunchtime where I am in Europe. I hope the same for all of you. And with that, I think we can close the event here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brecht. Thanks, everybody.